This is Daybreak Live on Dominion Television.
Right.
Good morning once again.
Good morning to you all.
Good morning,
of course, good morning to you, Yemi. It's really nice to always come back here every morning to discuss trending issues across the globe and most importantly, Nigeria. And this actually caught my attention yesterday when a witness came out to say, look, President Muhammadu Buhari approved the printing of Naira notes, redesigned Naira notes in Nigeria. And that brings about question about our monetary policies in Nigeria and how they are. Sometimes it's not really about the policy, it's about implementation. And the orders being given to, sometimes I think, just like people say, the federal system of government sometimes empowers the federal government too much, that they take decisions and then you begin to wonder why those decisions were taken in the first place. I mean, they have been saddled with the responsibility, yes, to oversee the affairs of the country, but when they take some decisions, especially when they are no longer in office, and people begin to question those decisions. I mean, how do you explain printing of Naira notes, redesigned Naira notes in Nigeria, and people were still looking for cash at that time?
Honestly, it was really, it was a terrible time in this country, speaking about that cashless era. And of course, a witness came out to say that, okay, Emefiele did not decide to print, the new Naira note on his own, that the president actually approved it. But the court is saying, even if the president approved it, you are supposed to go through the board recommendations, to ensure that, everything was in place. And then even people that worked with that particular administration, a lot of them back then said, oh, it will help us, reduce vote buying. So I asked a question this morning, how much of vote buying did it curb? And then how much of pain did it inflict on the people? Because I recall it was terrible. It doesn't matter whether you have money. People died during that policy. Because why? They could not access their money, and then hospitals were asking for cash. They are saying, do not send money, we prefer cash. And then even in Benue State, it was terrible to the fact that, to the point whereby people had to go back to trade by barter. So if you have Gary, and then I have rice, we can exchange. So it was really terrible, and then I don't know how we got it. And then away from that, I think the case is still in court. We've been on that case for years now, so I don't know when it's going to come to an end. And there was even a time that the court ruled that, 752 duplexes should be sold. And then a particular group came up to say, no, let's not sell it to. Let's give it to soldiers. So we are still debating certain issues about it, that I was able to amass, that kind of property, and not just the duplexes, money too, that made up, exactly, that has been forfeited because of, certain charges, against him. So it's really sad. And then I just want to believe, I don't know, whatever it is that they do now, it cannot really, bring back the lives of those who died back then. It cannot ease, the pain of some persons, even after that cashless policy. But at the end of the day, we believe justice must be served to see that, we really, face whatever it is that he needs to face, for actually doing certain things. And then another witness also mentioned, I think around last year, that even some commercial banks, they deliberately decided to hoard cash from people, just because they don't want a flow, they don't want a flow of the cash in the society. And then it affected a lot of things, for a lot of people. I remember that some of my friends will leave the house as early as 5 a.m. just because they want to get 10,000 naira cash at the bank. Some persons will go and they will still not get anything. So going back to that cashless policy, where honestly,
have millions of naira in your bank account and someone tells you can't take more than 10,000 naira. That's
exactly.
And to say that most businesses rejected cash transfers at that time, they wanted cash. They wanted to touch the money.
Exactly.
I mean, before then, people were moving towards cashless policy. Okay, I don't really have to pay you cash. I can transfer money to you. At that point, so many people weren't even touching cash as much. But immediately, the whole cashless policy issue and, of course, the scarcity of cash came on board. It became a problem. And then people were beginning to, what they were running away from, they started getting it done at that time. They started looking for cash. But then we'll talk about some issues that could have happened if they started printing cash excessively. And then we'll see how many of that actually happened to Nigeria as a country. But before we touch that, let's go on a quick break. When we return, Daybreak Live continues on Dominion Television. All right, welcome back from that short break. The show is still Daybreak Live right here on Dominion Television, your channel of choice. And we're talking about what the excess printing of the Naira actually did to the country, Nigeria. And I was talking about inflation. It was that period. Inflation rose to double figures. And then it kept rising and rising and rising. And, you know, sometimes people really do not understand why all of these things are happening. Most of these banks had to go through recapitalization. Okay, they were growing bigger and bigger, and then they needed to be sure and certain that the future of the monies kept in their custody would be safe. So they had to go through recapitalization, meaning they didn't have too much cash to spare, especially for those who were taking loans from them. And also, when the federal government at that time under President Muhammadu Buhari decided to print, what it did to the nation was to erode the trust people would have in some Nigerian institutions, and it became a problem in the long run. And if it was not curbed at that time, it would have caused a lot of things. In fact, it actually aided the depreciation of the Naira. And the spending power also reduced, because if the currency you are holding has less value, you just have, I mean, you can imagine holding 2,000 Naira that was enough for you to feed a whole family for a day, one time, and then you hold it now, you can't even take lunch or maybe dinner with it. So it has gone to that stage where the currency had no value at that time. And I do hope that this can be reversed one way or the other, that the Nigerian currency will hold value, regardless of how much it is against other currencies. But within Nigeria, there has to be some sort of value attached to it.
Right, I think you're very spot on. And then one thing I say is policies are good, but then at the end of the day, before you implement any policy, you should ensure that, you know, it will help the people more than it will affect them.
Right.
But that cashless policy, honestly, whether it
did more harm than good.
Did more harm than good. Yes, they did that because they wanted to, you know, reduce vote buying and things like that. But then at the end of the day, it was terrible. I recall that at the time, the POS people, it got worse to the point that, you know, you will use 500 Naira to collect 2,000 Naira. So even the card people, they had to inflate the prices. It was a lot. It was a lot. So, and I don't know, the president that, you know, actually approved is late. So, you know, what are we going to do? So I think it's left to the court to decide whatever judgment they are going to pass on Emefiele.
Right.
And then one more thing is the fact that I think at the time, even the court had to fine EFCC 500,000 because why? You know, they kept on delaying the trial of the man. I think that's why we are still here on this case ever since 2024. Why are we still on this matter? I think it's one reason why a lot of persons will say, no, the EFCC, they like to stall, they like to do this, but at the end of the day, they are saying we want to ensure that, you know, we do not, you know, mix up the issue. We want to ensure that proper investigations are done on this particular matter. So it speaks to the rot in the system, because how is it possible that someone was able to amass that level of property, you know, in the space of how many years? 753 duplexes. And the people were saying at the time, federal government said we are going to sell it all.
You know, that amounts to how many local governments we have in Nigeria?
All right, 774.
Maybe they should just build one more and name them. You know,
exactly.
Of course, maybe one will be Edo local government, the other will be Anwarukuba. And
so it was a lot at that time, and so I don't know, whatever it is that will be done to ensure that nobody will repeat this thing again. It doesn't matter, maybe the next governors that we are going to have for CBN, that nothing like this will happen again. So I also think the system is porous, because for him to have done that without recommendations, you know, from the board, maybe they didn't sit on the matter, or maybe he found a way to just boycott the board and then went on to print the money, or maybe the president's approval at that time, okay, maybe give them access to actually say we don't need the board to actually give us recommendations. I just feel the system is too porous. Yes, the president is the #1 citizen in a country, but at the end of the day, there are processes.
Some things should not be vetoed.
Right.
I mean, some things should, majority of the decisions should go through a certain level of verification and scrutinization to make sure that, just like you said earlier, it works for them more than it affects them. I mean, the Nigerian people. And obviously, what that scenario during that period caused was to increase the poverty level in the country. Until now, Nigeria is still grappling with the effect of the cashless policy we had back then. But I do hope that, just like I said earlier, this can be reversed one way or the other, because it's becoming more alarming that the Nigerian currency, compared to other currencies across the globe, really has no width. And even if it does, within Nigeria, how strong is the currency in terms of bargain when you want to buy things? You begin to wonder. I mean, just imagine you taking your salary, and then by the end of the next evening, you can't even say, I have 1,000 Naira in my bank account. That is actually my salary. So it has gotten that bad. And I believe that there are some mechanisms that can be put in place to forestall this free fall of the currency. And that should help the Nigerian nation.
Right.
But then, lastly, before we go, it also discouraged investors. Because there's no way you invest in a country that there's no stability for the currency. Today it is 1,400, tomorrow it is 1,300. You cannot plan a business that way. Meaning that if you start a business today, you might run into loss the next morning. You don't even know how much some resources will be gotten, especially raw materials. You don't know how much you will import some of the goods you'll be needing. And if that is the case, you keep inflating and reducing. You cannot really plan a business with that kind of model. And that will affect investors. They will not want to come in. And if, and only if, just like we have seen that the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's administration has been able to do, one way or the other, in the last maybe 2 or 3 months, it has been between 1,314, 1,314, it has been there. But there was a time where today it is 1,600 and the next morning it can be 1,700, especially in the parallel markets. There was no stability whatsoever. And I do hope that they can begin to now go a little bit backward, and then the Naira can actually have some sort of leverage against the dollar and some other currencies across the globe.
And then lastly, just on that Naira, I remember that even before that cashless policy, dollar was around 5 something, and then because of that, it jumped up, and then the whole subsidy removal worsened the situation. It jumped to around 700, 900, and of course, that's why
they had to remove the subsidy on the currency too, on the dollar, because at a point, if you are traveling, let's say for example, those who are going on religious pilgrimage, if you are traveling, you get your dollars at a different rate to people who are going to do business. It was even more expensive for people who do business with it than for who were traveling for religion. I mean, who does that? It shouldn't even happen in the first place. Who thought about it? Whose policy was that? I mean, if you traveling for pilgrimage is not for people who are still struggling, okay? The only reason you can think of traveling to maybe Mecca or Jerusalem is because you feel you are okay. It's not for the poor. I mean, I stand to be corrected, but it's not for the poor. You know, the last Hajj cost about 10 million naira. I mean, is that for the poor? No.
Samson, on top of that, do you know there's always a budget set aside for people who travel, especially for Christians and Muslims?
And even the government pay for something.
The government will pay for a lot of them. So what should we even say about that?
It is even more disheartening that even happens in Nigeria. It is not for the poor. If you know you want to go for Hajj, lesser Hajj, you want to go to Jerusalem or Jordan for religious pilgrimage, pay for it by yourself. Those are the areas where Nigeria's wealth and resources are getting leaked, and nobody is even talking about it, because we tend to overlook some things because it is favoring some people, and when it doesn't favor you anymore, then you become angry birds and then start complaining about the administration.
Because how do we trace the money that is set aside for these things? How do we trace it?
That should be something that should be looked into. No government should pay for anybody's luxury. If you want to do that, pay for yourself. The
same way government is not paying for you if you want to go on vacation with your family.
That's because honestly, there's no difference.
It's a secular state at the end of the day.
All right, that's the convenient point to leave that topic this morning.